Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm Pastor Erica. I'm one of the pastors here at Horizon Church, and I am so glad to see each and every one of you here this morning. I know what it takes some Sunday mornings to get up and to spend an hour here in worship, and I want to say thank you. Thank you very much for making that effort this morning. I want to share a little story with you. So before I was a pastor, I was a middle school teacher, math and science. That is not a good place to run from ministry. In fact, there was a time in February where I was like, I would have rather been Jonah in the belly of a whale for 3 days than a 7th grade classroom for another 3 months. But it's fine. I survived that year. But in this classroom, I was, in my first year of teaching, and at the open house, this dad of a kid comes up to me and he says, "Hey, I'm a pastor of the church just down the street. Can you tell me, do you have any kids who maybe need some help paying for like a field trip or maybe has some hard times?" And I actually had 2 kids that I had met their parents a little earlier in the day. One was in foster care. She had just arrived in foster care, been removed from her home and placed there, and she was like the people she was living with just didn't really know how they were going to make it all work. So they just wanted to let me know that was going on. And then the second one was living in, his name was Michael. He was living in a hotel at the time. His mom had told me they were, trying to figure out how to get a little bit more stability. And so he's like, "Do you have their contact information?" And I was a first year teacher and I didn't know any better, so I gave him their contact information. I was like, "Yes, here you go." And 3 months later, I'm sitting in a parent-teacher conference with both of those parents, and the foster mom of the girl who was in there is like just crying. She was like, "Everything I needed, this church provided." And I was like, "Wait, who's the pastor of this church?" And she was like, "He's one of your dads." I was like, "Oh my goodness." That dad, who was a pastor of a church, figured out how to use their church to just give these families whatever it was that they needed. The family who was living in the hotel room, there were some folks who had owned an apartment building. They got him set up in permanent housing, and the kid was like excelling. He was doing great in school for the first time ever in his life because he'd always been transient, moving from one place to the next. And that was the place, right? I had grown up in church my whole life. I had read the Bible from front to back. I'd been in small groups. I'd done all the things, and my faith never really impacted the world around me. I knew what I was supposed to do that was right or wrong, and that list was pretty long, right? I knew those kinds of things, but I had never seen my faith in Jesus impact the world around me. And for the first time in my entire life, I watched somebody's faith make the love of God real and tangible to people who were desperate to know that they were loved, that they were important, and they were worthy. So I went to his church that following Sunday, nervous and scared because I had not been in church in a really long time. And I'll never forget an 80-year-old woman named Ellen Kepley walked down the steps of the front of that church, grabbed my hand, and sat with me during the service as this church talked about all of the ways that they made God's love real in the world. I saw Jesus's compassion just come alive. I saw how faith and community and love are all central to actually living as disciples of Christ. People who follow Jesus make the love of God real every single day in the lives of other people. And so it is with that lens, with that life experience that I read to you Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52. Then they came to Jericho. So it was Jesus and his disciples, 12 guys that were following him around. They had come to a town called Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting on the roadside begging. Then he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, and he began to shout. This beggar on the street began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him, "Be quiet." They told him, "Stop talking." But he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and he came to Jesus. "What do you want for me to do to you?" Jesus asked him. And the blind man looked Jesus in the face and he said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus. "Your faith has healed you." Immediately, he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, passing through Jericho. Has anyone heard of this city of Jericho before? It's actually pretty significant in the Bible. So when the Israelites were living out in the wilderness for 40 years, waiting to come into the promised land, they get there, and the very first thing that they have to do is work through this walled city called Jericho. And so God gives them an important task. He says, you're going to walk for 6 days. Everybody, the priest and the people, everybody's going to walk around these walls one time. People, you're going to stay silent. Priest, you've got these special horns. We want you to blow those. But walk around the wall once every day for 6 days and be silent. And then on the 7th day, I want you to walk around 7 times. And on the 7th time, I want you to shout and be loud. So they walk around 6 times. They're like, God, this is wild. Like, what are you going to do in here, right? What are you going to do through us? This is a crazy commandment, but they had faith. They believed God would move, and so they did what they could, and they took off walking around this city. And on the 7th day, they took off walking around the walls of this city the 7th time. And they got back to the beginning, and they started to shout. And you know what happened? The walls came tumbling down. Can I get an amen? Amen. The walls came tumbling down. So these people have followed Jesus into Jericho because they know God's already done something amazing here. There's already been walls torn down. There's already been a proven track record of God's faithfulness in this place. I wonder what God might do now. Now, I need to ask you a question this morning. Is that how you got up and headed to worship this morning? Did you expect God to continue to be a faithful God in this place this morning? Did you expect for God to show up and do something in your heart or in your life? Did you pray that God would move through somebody who maybe is coming in here for the first time in a long time? Did you expect God to move? Because these people heard that Jesus was coming and they expected him to do something. They expected Jesus to do something. And among this crowd is a man named Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus, a blind beggar sitting on the side of the road. Please, nobody notice me. He has been pushed to the side, to the absolute edge. Everybody has ignored him or thrown cash at him and just wanted him to stay out of their way and out of their lives. But he's heard. Did you hear? God gets to us any way God can. He couldn't see, but he could hear. And he had heard about Jesus and what Jesus could and would do, and his spirit tuned in to something deep. He knows this is his chance. He knows this is his moment. And so from the depths and desperation and longing, he cries out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Some of you in here this morning know what it's like to be on the side of the road all alone. You know what it's like to feel like you're the only person who can't see or can't work or can't do what it is that needs to be done. You know all too well what it's like to be lonely and on the side of the road. And I want you to hear what happens. What does Bartimaeus do? He's not afraid to call out. I need some help, Jesus. Can you see me, Jesus? I want to ask you a question this morning. Those of you who are sitting in the throes of something difficult and hard, it takes courage. This guy has no idea if Jesus is going to keep walking and ignore him. He just has a little inkling of hope that something could be different in his life because Jesus, the Son of God, was there. And so he says, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus saw him. Jesus heard him. You need to find your people. Don't be afraid to call out. I can't tell you how many coffees I've had at Kawa or Buddy Brew or at my living room, and people look at me and they're like, you don't understand. I'm suffering from this addiction. I've experienced this depression and anxiety. I don't know what I'm going to do with my finances. I have no idea where my career is headed. You don't understand, Erica. And I'm like, I met with 70 people who say the exact same thing you do. You're doing the right thing. You're calling out. You're saying, God, there's got to be some way that's different. God doesn't want you alone. That's why this story is included in this Bible. Because we see Bartimaeus call out to Jesus. Find your people. Don't be afraid to call out. Don't be afraid to say, I'm hurting. I'm lonely. I'm hungry. I want to flourish. I'm tired of living life like this. Bartimaeus was unafraid to call out to Jesus. In our lives, finding our people means that we can't live in fear of reaching out for somebody else. Maybe it's in your small group or in this church community or our family or our neighbors. Look around. Sometimes, like Bartimaeus, you need to cry out, not because you're weak, not because you're special, not because no one in the world loves you or doesn't think you're capable of anything, but you need to call out because you believe something greater is actually possible. Who can you call out to? Because the truth is that if I ask some of you, who are you calling out to? In your time of need, in your struggle, are you reaching out to those who point you toward Jesus? Are you building a relationship with people who strengthen your faith in the one that is greater than anything we could ever experience? And Bartimaeus didn't let the voices of doubt or rejection stop him. When the crowd told him, be quiet, don't say that, he shouted even louder. When we are trying to find our people, we are going to sometimes have to push through the noise, through the distractions, and even the negativity that says, be quiet, stay silent. But Bartimaeus knew what he needed. He needed Jesus, and that conviction called him to yell out even louder. Now, I want you to also hear what happens. We see a shift in the crowd's attitude after Bartimaeus says, Jesus, have mercy on me. At first, they try to silence Bartimaeus, right? Shh, don't mess with Jesus. Don't do that. But when Jesus responds, the crowd changes its tune. Don't be afraid. Come on. Hey, Jesus is calling for you. Here's the second most important part of this. Love your neighbor by being someone who calls others forward. Let Jesus transform you. And quit being the person that says, shh, don't share that. Stop talking right now. This isn't the time to share that. And start being the person who says, go. Jesus is calling you. Jesus has something powerful and amazing for you. Get up. Go spend time with Jesus. Cheer up. God is up to something. The crowd saw Jesus stop for Bartimaeus. And when Jesus showed interest in the blind man, suddenly the crowd turned from critics to encouragers. What does it take for you to turn from a critic to an encourager? They became the messengers of good news. They told Bartimaeus, don't be afraid. He's calling to you. Jesus wants you free. Jesus wants you fed. Jesus wants you to flourish. As followers of Christ, we are called to be a voice of encouragement. We are called to be a voice of encouragement for others. How often do you find yourselves dismissing or overlooking those in need? Maybe we're part of the crowd telling someone, shh, stay quiet, whether by ignoring their pain or by not responding to their need for love and support. But when Jesus stops, he calls someone forward. We need to be the ones who say, come. He's calling for you. Who in your life needs that call today? Maybe it's someone on your block who's struggling with loneliness, a friend dealing with a difficult season. When Jesus calls them forward, he's inviting us to be a part of that process of encouraging and loving them as people that are worthy. Faith transforms this man, and love leads to healing. The final part of this story is where the true transformation happens, right? Jesus asked Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asks him that. And Bartimaeus boldly and courageously says, "I want to see." Bartimaeus had the faith to ask for something that felt impossible, the ability to see. And because of that faith, Jesus said, "Your eyes are healed because of your faith." Immediately, Bartimaeus could see, and he chose to follow Jesus down the road. There's something beautiful in this exchange. It wasn't just the physical healing of Bartimaeus' eyes, but the healing of his heart, his spirit, and his place in the community. Before, when Jesus arrived, Bartimaeus was on the side of the road, pushed to the edge of the street, unseen, unnoticed, feeling unworthy and unloved, just begging for anything anybody had that was extra. And then when Bartimaeus cried out, Jesus didn't just give him sight, he gave him a place in a community. Bartimaeus found himself, did you hear how this story ends? He's walking down the road with Jesus and his disciples, with his people again. Because Jesus didn't just heal his sight, he gave him a place in community. Friends, in this story, we are both Bartimaeus and we are the crowd. There are moments where we need to cry out for help, and there are moments when we need to be the ones calling others forward. Find your people. Don't be afraid to call out in faith. Surround yourself with people who will drag you to the feet of Jesus, and love your neighbor. Be the voice that brings others to Jesus, that encourages the Bartimaeus in your life to step forward. Because when love leads the way, healing, restoration, and transformation always follow. There is an opportunity in our church for us to love those who are unseen. We have a partnership with Sharemonte Elementary School where the 5 kids in each grade level who are at risk of not making it to the next one because of their attendance or discipline problems or whatever, people go and eat lunch with them one day a week. They sit down and the kids eat their lunch, and we begin to notice that we are feeding them more than food in that lunchtime. We're providing mentors and love and support. The principal told me last year that some of the kids went from having a terrible attendance record to a better one because they knew that if they showed up on Wednesday, their lunch buddy was going to be there to support and love and care for them. Talk about freeing people. Talk about feeding people. We just make the love of Jesus real. And then it becomes real to us. We begin to find our gifts and our passions, our goodness that we have to offer to the world around us. I didn't think I could meet with a kid who was wild and running around and wouldn't sit down and eat lunch. And yet God used those people in the most bold ways to help these kids find the security and safety to be still and quiet for a few minutes. Their lives were so chaotic, they didn't hardly know how to do that. Because they looked beyond themselves. They looked to the place where nobody else had told them to look. They saw them, and they offered love and transformation. People in our Love Inc. program that helps people who are unhoused get the things that they need to get back into permanent housing. They make phone calls. They help them fill out applications. They do those kinds of things because we want to make the love and compassion of Jesus real. When you leave this place today, you have an opportunity. You all have a cell phone in your pocket or in your hand right now. And you can text somebody who's going through a hard time and just tell them you see them and you love them. You today can call people forward. It is time we quit telling people to be quiet, ignore their pain, and sit over in the corner. And it is time, as followers of Jesus, believe boldly that God's going to do something in and through the Jesus who's given us power to shine light and ignite change. Today is the day that this begins. And it begins with your hands, your feet, your mouth, your hands. Make God's love real today. And if you don't know the goodness and the fullness of that love, I want you at the end of this service, I'm going to have a time of communion. I'll be standing in the back. Come pray with me. Because I want you to know that Jesus sees you and is calling out to you to live your life different in a way that believes that you are worthy and you are good and you have something amazing to offer to this world. It changes everything. God's compassion is made real through Jesus. reach out and touch it today. Will you pray with me? God, I pray for each person in this room that you'll use their hands and their feet, their bodies and their minds, their stories, God, to do something mighty and amazing in this world. I pray for those who are sitting in these seats and who feel lonely and don't really know what it is you're calling them to. They don't believe, God, that you're a God who wants them to flourish. I pray for them right now. Give them courage this morning to step into the way that leads to life. I pray for those this morning, God, who know what it's like to be bound up and chained up by so many things, and I pray, God, you will free them. For those who are hungry and thirsty for a faith that matters, God, give them opportunities to make it real, to share your compassion with a world that needs it. And most of all, God, I pray that in this place, you will empower these people to shine your light and ignite your change in a world desperate for it. Amen.